The first thing we're going to do is ultimately in the end, this is the last thing and then it's just word problems. But what we want to do is I want to be able to give you a graph and you tell me the equation of it. Okay? Now, it's going to be a sine or a cosine graph because it does this. We agree? Periodic. Remember sine and cosine graphs? I showed you this right off the bat, that the sine x graph and the cos x graph are just a 90-degree phase shift from each other, right? They would just be landing on top of each other, correct? So the only difference between a sine graph and a cos graph is the c value. So if you look here on the bottom of your formula sheet, they both have a's in front, which is the amplitude. Does the amplitude change the half the distance from min to max if it's a sine or a cos? No. Does the midline change the middle of the graph, whether it's a sine or a cos? No. Does the graph, the b value change? The b value you get from the period. Does the period of the graph change, whether it's a sine or a cos? Does it repeat any faster or any slower if it's a sine or a cos? No. The only thing that's different is the c. Okay? So if I'm finding a sine equation or a cos equation, I find a, b, and d all the same. I don't know what that was. Okay. So we're going to find the amplitude first. So the amplitude, we can do, oh, I love this computer stuff. The amplitude we can do one of two ways. We can physically count from the min to the max and divide by 2. So from min to max, it's from negative 10 all the way to 10. How much is that? What's 10 to 10? If I count along the way. 10 and then 10 more. 20. Yes, it is. 20 divided by 2 is 10. So I can do it that way, or I could use the formula, which was absolute value of max minus min divided by 2. Either way, you get an amplitude of 10. So it would be absolute value of 10 minus a minus 10 divided by 2, which is 20 divided by 2, which is 10. I just like counting from top to bottom and dividing by 2 personally. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, it's not written on here, but I'm going to do midline. The midline, you can use max plus min divided by 2. Which would be 10 plus negative 10 divided by 2, which is 0 divided by 2, so it's at 0. Or you can use the formula, or you can count up your amplitude from the minimum. So if I count up 10, I go to here. If I count down 10, I go to here. And where do they meet at? The middle, the midline. That's why it's called the midline. So they meet here. You need to draw the midline on your graph. Please draw it. It'll help you for your c value. So we have a midline at y equals 0. So those are the two things we're going to do first. We're going to do amplitude and midline of each graph, okay? Like I said, you can use the formulas if you want, or amplitude you can just count up, divide by 2, and then midline count up the amplitude, down the amplitude, where they meet in the middle is the midline, okay? Let's go down here. This one. Oh, this is really faint. Okay, so I'm going to count up from negative 2 to 2. How much is that? A distance of 4 divided by 2 is 2. We agree? My midline, you can use the formula I gave you, max plus min divided by 2, or you can count up to, stop, and then count down to, stop, and where's the midline at? The x-axis. What's the equation for that? What's the equation of the x-axis? Y equals 0. What's the equation of the y-axis? X equals 0. The equation of the x-axis is y equals 0. So my midline is a line, and it's at y equals 0. It needs y equals, or it's just a number randomly floating there. If it's a midline, it needs to have an equation, so it needs to have a y. And we draw our midline. Always have to draw our midline because that will help us with our c. Okay? Next page. What's the amplitude of this one? We start at negative 10 and we go up to 10. How much is that a distance of? 20. And then we divide by 2 to get the amplitude. So it's 10. And then I count up 10 and I count down 10 from the max. And they meet at the middle, which is the midline. Once again, which is the x-axis, y equals 0. Is the midline always the x-axis? No, it can change. So we have a midline, y equals 0. And we need to draw the midline. Like I said, that's going to help you get your C value. All right. What's the amplitude of this one? Up 2, and then up 2 more, so it's 4 divided by 2, which is 2. And then I count up 2, count down 2, and this one meets at the x-axis again. So the midline is at y equals 0. Does that make sense? Okay, you give me the amplitude and midline of the next two. Okay, so the amplitude, we could do you could do absolute value of max minus min divided by 2, or we can count. How far is it from -7 to -1? A value of 6 divided by 2 is 3. Then if I count up 3, I get to -4. I count down 3, I get to -4. And so my midline is at y equals -4. Bless you. And I always draw it because it will help me get my C values for my sine graph. This one, I go from -3 to 3, so that's a distance of 6 again, divided by 2, amplitude of 3. So these graphs actually have the exact same amplitude. They're the same height from min to max. I somehow am moving this. Oh, gosh. There we go. All right. And then I count up 3, down 3, and this one has a midline again at y equals 0. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is the period. We need a b value on an equation, do we not? Is the period and the b value the same thing? Are p and b equal to each other in the alphabet? Like Paula and Bala, same thing? In the alphabet, p and b, same thing? No, p and b are also not the same thing in this equation. So I gave you equations for these. So we're going to go right back to the top here. I gave you equations for the period. Oh gosh, I did that again. No, this is really terrible that it's doing this to me. I have to get it to fit back onto the graph. Why is it not moving to that? Did I shift pages? Oh gosh. Yeah, I moved the pages. This is great. Whatever. Okay. So the equations I gave you were p equals 2 pi over b. Oh my goodness. The b and the p can switch. So we could just say b equals 2 pi over p. And they can switch because the b can come up and multiply and the p can come down. So I could also use b equals 360 degrees over p as well. I can rearrange it. But B and P are not the same thing. You have to remember that. So I need the period to get B, or I need B to get the period. So if I gave you the equation like I did today, right, and I asked you for the period of the graph, you plugged it in for B and got P, correct? So if I want the B of the equation, I need the period, and then I can do it. Now, this x-axis is in what? Is it in radians or degrees? It's in radians, correct? So which one of these equations am I going to use? B equals 2 pi over P, or B equals 360 degrees over P? The radians, right? We use radians because the x-axis is in radians. Okay? All right. So how long does this graph take to repeat itself? So I'm going to start on the x-axis, or on the y-axis, sorry. I'm going to go past from a max, past a min, back up to the max. And when does it happen again? These go up by 0.5, so we agree? So if you're not sure if that's 4, which it looks like it's 4, we could go from a max to a min. A max to a min takes 2 pi, doesn't it, horizontally, from 0 to 2 pi? And a max to a min is what? Half the period, correct? If a max to a max is the full period, a max to a min is half the period. So if this thing is half the period in 2 pi, the full period is in pi. So I know the period happens in 4 pi, sorry. But can I put 4 pi in for the B value? Do B and P equal the same thing? No, so to find the B value, I have to use the period. So B would equal 2 pi divided by the period, so 4 pi. So B equals a half. So you just go 2 pi divided by 4 pi and you get a half. Okay, we're going to look at the next. Oh gosh, I did it again. Why? Hatred. Okay, we're going to look at this one. I'm going to try starting here. Go past a max, past a min. I always try starting at the y-axis if possible, and then back to that same height. What is that happening at? 2 pi? Starting at that height, past a max, past a min, back to that height. Horizontally, that's from 0 to 2 pi, is it not? So that's a period of 2 pi. So my B equals 2 pi, is that true? Is my period the same as my B? No. So my B equals 2 pi divided by 2 pi, which is 1. Which makes sense, because the original sine and cosine graph have a period of 2 pi. So there's no horizontal stretch, right? It's just the same as the original. Is this the next one that I shifted? Okay. This graph, I'm going to start at a min. I always try the y-axis first, if possible. Past a max, back to the min. And that's from 0 to pi, it looks like. So the period is pi till it repeats itself. So B equals 2 pi divided by the period. So B is 2, which makes sense because that would have a horizontal stretch of a half then, because our B would flip, correct? And it's half the period of the normal, which is 2 pi. Make sure you're paying attention. So B is 2. Okay, this one. From a min to a max, back down to a min, 0.67. So my b is going to be 2 pi divided by 0.67. And you could just leave it like that. Or you could go 2 divided by 0.67. Which gets me 200 over 67. So if I just put it in without the pi, I'd get 200 pi over 67. So I could do it that way too. And the third graph. From a max to a max, from 0 to 4, so it's 4. Some people say, well, is that degrees? Does this x-axis have degree symbols on it? No, if the x-axis had degree symbols, I'd do 360 degrees but divided by it. But none of them have been in degrees, so I'm going to go 2 pi or the period is 4. So b equals 2 pi divided by 4. So it's pi over 2. And then this last one, not going very well. This is the y-axis. So it goes from the middle, past a min, past a max, back down to that same height, and it takes 4 as well. So it has a period of 4. So my b equals 2 pi divided by 4. So it's pi over 2 as well. So we're going to go through and do all of the values of the equations except for the c. Yep. You can. But then you're going to, you can. There's no set way. I always just start on the y-axis and see if I can find it, because then it's just 0 to something. If you started from a max to a max, you'd have to go, okay, that's a distance of -1 to 0, so that's 1. And then plus 3 more, so it's 4. Still the same distance, though. Yeah, you can absolutely go from max to max. Yep. Okay, so we're going to write out equations here. We're going to get 4 equations. Why are we going to get 4? Because our amplitude always has to be positive, we agree? But does our a value have to be positive? No, our a could be negative or positive. So we're going to go like this. We're going to go y equals, our amplitude is 10, which comes from our a value, we agree? Our a value is our amplitude off the equation, we know that. So we're going to get positive 10 sine. Y equals negative 10 sine. Y equals positive 10 cos. Y equals negative 10 cos. So our a values can be positive or negative, we agree, off of our equations? Our amplitude has to be positive, but our a values can be positive or negative. So we know our amplitude's 10, so we can get 4 equations. Now some people will say, well, which one's correct? Whichever one's on the diploma. Or they might say, sine equation, a has to be greater than 0. So if a had to be greater than 0, then I'd have to do this equation sine, right? Or they could say cos equation, a has to be less than or equal to 0, so, or less than 0, so then I'd have to pick this cos equation, right? So they can do that. Or they can only give you one of them that are correct in the multiple choice, and you have to figure it out, okay? But the only thing that changes between these is the a values are positive or negative, and our c values. Because in the equation, what comes next? B, correct? Doesn't B come next? What's the B? What did we figure it out to be for this question? It's a half, correct? We found it out? So we go a half, a half, a half, a half. And then we have x and something. This is our C value, our horizontal shift. We're going to do that last. And then we need a d. What's our d based on? What is our d? The midline is our d. We know that, right? The d and the midline are the same thing. If I asked you for the midline and gave you an equation, you just give me the d value with a y in front of it. Y equals the d value. So the midline is 0, so I'd have a plus 0 at the back. Do I need to have plus 0 at the back? Like if they don't have a plus 0, are they going to be wrong? No, adding a 0 doesn't matter. But that is what the midline is. The midline is 0. Okay? Next graph. We're going to come up with 4 equations. Y equals, now positive a. A is 2. Our amplitude is 2. So we're going to go positive 2 sine. Y equals negative 2 sine. Y equals positive 2 cos. Y equals negative 2 cos. So the a value only changes between plus or minuses. And we have a bracket. What comes next? B. We found B. What was B? 1. And then we get x, bracket, bracket, as a space because you have to put a c value in there. That's the last thing we're going to do because it's the hardest. At the back, we have the d value. Where do we get the d value from? What's the d the same as? Midline. And our midline is 0, so we add a 0 at the back again. We don't technically need to, but we are just to prove point. Then we're going to flip to the next one. So literally, we're done all 4 equations except for the c values. All off of the same things, because nothing changes between a, b, and d, just signs on a. Okay, we're going to come up with the equation of this one. Then we're going to have y equals positive amplitude, so 10, sine b, which is 2, x something, plus my midline, which is 0. Then I'm going to get y equals negative 10 sine b, which is 2, x plus 0. I'm going to get y equals 10 cos 2, x plus 0, and y equals negative 10 cos 2, x plus 0. So my a value comes from my amplitude, my d value comes from my midline, and my b value comes from the formula, not p. If you put the period in for b, they will have that answer there. Every single time, you will get it wrong. Period and b value are not the same thing. You use the period to get the b value, you use the b value to get the period, but they are not useful to each other, like you can't fill them directly in. Okay, this one. You're going to have y equals positive 2 for the amplitude sine. My b value was 200 pi over 67. Bracket x. And my midline is a 0. Then y equals negative 2 sine 200 pi over 67 x plus 0. Y equals positive 2 cos 200 pi over 67 x something plus 0. Y equals negative 2 cos 200 pi over 67 x plus 0. And this one. This one we're going to get y equals positive 3 sine, because amplitude c is 3. Pi over 2 is my b. X something. Midline this time is a negative 4, so I have to subtract 4. Y equals negative 3 sine pi over 2. X something minus 4. Y equals negative or positive 3 cos pi over 2. X minus 4. Y equals negative 3 cos pi over 2 x minus 4. Then we have one last one. All right, so for this one we'd have y equals positive 3 sine. B is going to be pi over 2 x. And then my midline was 0 again. Y equals negative 3 sine pi over 2 x plus 0. Y equals positive 3 cos pi over 2 x plus 0. And y equals negative 3 cos pi over 2 x plus 0. Today we're just going to do the cos, the c values for cos. So your original cos graph, just an FYI, your original cos graph started up here and it went like this. This was y equals cos x. We agree? Yeah? So what's on the y-axis? A maximum. We agree? So if the maximum is not on the y-axis, it's been horizontally shifted. So literally to get our c value, we just look for our closest maximum. That's it. And if it's over here, it moved to the right that much. If it's over here, it moved to the left that much. So if it's a positive cos, we look for the closest max. So we're going to go through and do all the positive coses. So where's the maximum as opposed to the y-axis here? Remember, horizontal shifts are how far away it is from the y-axis. How far away is that maximum from the y-axis? Trick question. It's not. It's on the y-axis. So has it been shifted at all? No? So my positive cos equation is done. This one is done. There is no c value. It's not been shifted. So we're going to go to this one. Okay. Where's my maximum? Is it on the y-axis? No. My closest max is here. How far over is that? It should say on the graph. I just can't see it. 0.33, right? 0.33 to the right. We agree? Maximum? Or nope, sorry, that's the page. What is it? 0.75 pi Wow, that's a really nice number. 0.75 pi is how far away this is. To the right. So when I put it into my equation, I'm going to actually have to go what? For the positive cos. So for the positive cos, I'm going to have to go x minus 0.75 pi. Why did I minus it? Because that's to the right, correct? Where's the closest max here? It's either here or here. Could I actually use any of the maxes and still be correct? Yeah, you could use any of the maxes and still be correct. They just might ask for the shortest horizontal phase shift, and then you'd have to look for the closest. This one is equally closest, so it's either 0.5 pi right or 0.5 pi left. So what they can do is they could go like this. Put a minus sign in there. And you'd have to pick the one to the right. That's all. Could you have put plus 0.5 pi and still been correct? Yes, both of them would have worked because they're equidistant. You can't leave. All right. Then we're going to go back to this one. If I wanted to do positive or negative cos, instead of looking for the closest maximums, what do you suppose I'm going to look for? Closest minimums. This one, where's my minimum as opposed to my y-axis? It's actually on the y-axis, isn't it? So it hasn't been moved at all. My negative cos one is done. So now I've done both of these. Go to this one down here. I'm going to get you to do the negative cos and the positive cos C values. The negative cos C value, my minimum is on the y-axis. So has my minimum been moved at all? No, so my negative cos is done. My positive cos, though, are my maximums on it? No, but they're both equidistant away, 0.33. So I could go x minus 0.33, and that would be the 33 to the right. Or you could have went x plus 0.33, and that'd be the 33 to the left, right? So when you're looking for the C value of cos positive, you look for the closest max. And when you're looking for the C value of cos negative, like the negative A value, you look for the closest min. That's it, from the y-axis. Coses are really easy. So that's why I want to do those today. So I would write a little note at the top of my page, the very top of the booklet. I would give myself positive cos, the C value, closest max to y-axis. And then negative cos, so negative A value, your C value is the closest min. Oops. And I have to give you homework. I'm only going to make you find the cos equations today, but the sine equations, you could find everything except for the what right now? The C, right? Because the A, the B, and the D are all the same. So your homework is page 253, 15, and 16. Now, 15 is sine graphs, so you're going to do everything but the C value. 16 is cos graphs, you can do the entire equation. All the both positive and negative equations, right? So for 15, you're going to do the whole entire equation but the C value. So you can still do the A, the B, and the D because it doesn't change. So 15 and 16 on page 253. And you need to make sure you can finish all those questions I gave you. And remember, you're handed